Right, right. So if you had to make a strong case for the kind of NATO involvement, because it's obviously not just the US, although the US is the primary mover here, probably followed by the UK, I would say. That's how it appears to me. If you had to make a strong case for what NATO is doing, what would the case be? I mean, we talked about the necessity of deterring Russian aggression, especially in relationship to Ukraine. Do you believe that it's reasonable to assume that Russia presents a credible threat to the integrity of the NATO alliance or the West outside the specific case of Ukraine? And I mean, we should point out that Ukraine and Russia have been integrally tied together for the entire history of both countries. There's less separation there than there is between Canada and the US, and we're two countries that are very tightly tied together. So the relationship between Russia and Ukraine is not of thoroughly independent sovereign states with an immense history of political and cultural difference. So the involvement of Russia in Ukraine is unbelievably complex, and vice versa. But we might say, well, Russia is an expansionist state in the style of the Soviet Union, and therefore poses a potential threat to the integrity of Eastern and Western Europe. And of course, the Russians made all sorts of incursions into Eastern Europe. So there's some historical precedent for that. And so we could say, well, you could make a case for keeping that threat at bay. Is there another case that can be made for our involvement in this war?
Yeah. So, look, the mindset of the objectives of NATO here, there has been a legitimate viewpoint that suggests that if Putin moves into Ukraine, if he takes over some or eventually all of Ukraine, or even just part of it, that this could reflect the fact that he's hell-bent somehow on expansionism, on an expansionist ambition, and that expansionist ambition is going to spill over into other NATO countries. So Ukraine isn't in NATO, but it is, as some describe it, NATO adjacent. And so there is concern that this could spill over into those countries. I get that. And I understand that we have an obligation as the United States to defend our NATO allies and protect them. The problem with that is it's at once very speculative. We don't know that to be the case. And as you point out, there is a lot more history between Russia and Ukraine, especially parts of Ukraine, a lot more of a cultural, historical connection, in some cases a linguistic connection between Russia and Ukraine than there is a lot of these other countries. But secondly, we could just as easily, it seems to me, be bringing about the very thing we're trying to avoid. Now, I don't count myself as an expert in this area by any means. I'm just trying to outline the two viewpoints, because the other viewpoint is also valid, which is that if we get involved in this, if we fund a proxy war against that same adversary, Russia, we could be inviting more of the same, especially if, as I suspect, I don't know that the United States has the intestinal fortitude to go into a full-blown war with Russia. And if it doesn't, then what happens? Then what have we done? Have we provoked Russia to become even more expansionist? Could that undermine the security of our NATO allies even more than just staying out altogether would have done? I don't know the answer to these questions. But the fact that they're not being seriously asked and debated and discussed in the halls of Congress is deeply troubling to me, as is the fact that whenever anybody, including me, raises questions like this, we're immediately tagged on Twitter, for example, as Putin lovers, which is absurd and preposterous. I have a distinct loathing for the man. I think he's awful. But it's because he's awful, not in spite of it, that I've got real concerns about our involvement here. I'm not sure it's going to do anything like what those advocating it believe it will do for us, or our allies for that matter.
Mm-hmm. So